Hey everyone, welcome to today's webcast, Powering Sustainability and Circularity with Connected Products. I'm Joel McCoward, Chairman of GreenBiz Group, and happy as always to welcome listeners from around the world. Before we begin, a few housekeeping details I want to go through. The screen you're looking at right now has a few features that I want to point out. As the slide on your screen shows, you can resize and move around the various windows on the webcast platform to optimize your viewing experience. At the bottom of the screen, there's a toolbar with various buttons. For example, you can download the resources from today's webcast. Just click on the button marked Resources. If you have questions for today's speakers, just click on the Q&A button, type your question into the window that shows up. We'll be fielding those later on in the program, but don't hesitate to ask them along the way. You can also chat with other attendees at any time. Just click on the group chat button. And this webcast is being recorded. The recording will be shared with all registrants later on today. And finally, feel free to share what you're learning with your Twitter network. Just use the hashtag GRNBZ. That's GreenBiz without the vowels. All right, let's get going. With companies pledging zero carbon targets and with growing consumer demands for transparency and provenance of products, traceability is becoming increasingly important. Some companies are turning to cloud-based solutions to accurately map their raw materials and carbon footprint at every stage of their supply chain and track from consumer to source to consumer and beyond where these things are going and where they've been. These solutions are enabling companies to create engaging consumer experiences, enable circularity, drive sustainability, and provide digital traceability of their entire supply chain. So, how are companies doing that? That's today's topic, leveraging digital technologies to drive sustainability and the circular economy. Joining me today are Max Winograd, Vice President of Connected Products at Avery Dennison SmartTrack, and David Quast, Global Director of Brand Sustainability at Adidas, or as we Americans often say, Adidas. I'm going to pass it now to Max to start the conversation. Take it away, Max.
Thank you, Joel, and great to be here with everyone today. Thanks for taking the time. During this webinar, over the next 60 minutes, 10,500 tons of textile waste will be generated, and over 148,000 tons of food waste will be generated. Just in the next 57 minutes. Now, imagine if we had this webinar on July 8th, 2022. Those numbers would simply be higher, unless we did something about it. And at Avery Dennison, we really strive to deliver innovations that advance the circular economy. And we have a fundamental belief and a conviction that we can transform products, the very things that are generating those massive amounts of waste I just described, into enablers for a more sustainable world. And in order to do that, though, we need a lot more information about the physical products on our shelf, in our wardrobe, at our grocery store. In order to do that, we really need to give products a voice. And in order to do that, in order to give them that voice, we have to give and link each physical item to a unique digital identity. And the idea behind that is that unique digital identity becomes the method in which a product can now talk. And now that a product can talk, it can tell you where it's been, it can tell you how it was made, it can tell you where it was made, and it can tell you how to give it a second life, how to operate more sustainably, and even if the product itself is authentic. What we're doing when we hear a product talk, we're actually peering into the soul of that product and learning from our products how we as individual consumers can be more sustainable and how the brands that we put trust into are taking action to advance the circular economy. The need for that interaction directly with a product is only becoming more and more critical as the demands for circularity and transparency continue to increase. And so if you think about interacting with a product, I want to put out a poll question to the group as we get started. If you could interact directly with a product, what would you like to learn from it? Take a second to click on your preferences. We'll give folks a couple more seconds here, and then we'll show some results. All right, most of you have shared your perspective here. Let's see. It looks like one of the key things that people want to learn from are the product origin, its raw materials, its ingredients, but also how to care for it, how to resell it, and how to recycle it, as well as its carbon footprint. So this is really great insights, and thanks for taking the poll. Now, one of the reasons we wanted to ask the question was we wanted to understand what really can help enable that product to drive a more sustainable world, based on what consumers actually want to learn by peering into the soul of the product. And so we also wanted to show you just an example of what that might look like as well. We thought the best way to do this was to actually put a digital identity, obviously manifested here as a QR code, on the screen and show an experience of interacting directly with a product that can talk. And this is coming from a brand that we put trust into, who's truly taking action to advance the circular economy. And so if you can scan that QR code, you'll be able to see an experience that shows you exactly some of the things that you were hoping to learn from that product. What it was made from, its origin, exactly how to care for it, how to resell it, how to donate it. And for those that don't have their camera on their phone in front of them to take that QR code, you can see some examples in the screenshot on the screen. This is just one example of what's possible when you actually go beyond the physical product and bridge it to the digital world, giving it a unique digital identity that helps each consumer become empowered to advance the circular economy and to help create a more sustainable world. And now I want to hand it over to my friend David to share exactly how Adidas, one of the leaders in driving towards a more circular economy, is doing just that.
Thank you, Max. Indeed, over the next couple of minutes, I would like to take you on a journey of why what Max shared is of vital importance to Adidas. What you see here is the Adidas strategy on one page that will lead us to 25. And within the Adidas strategy, there are a couple of reasons why connected product resonates with us. One, obviously, being the consumer and our ambition to be with the consumer beyond the point of sale. Another one being experience and our desire to offer deep and meaningful experiences to the consumer about and around our products. Another one, obviously, being digital. So wherever the consumer is, whenever the consumer wants to, we want to empower the consumer to access information at their fingertips. And a fourth reason, and personally to me, that's the most exciting, is sustainability. And when we deep dive into sustainability and into the journey that Adidas has taken over the past decades, you also might appreciate why connected product plays and will play a key role for us as we move forward. So if we rewind 20 years back, sustainability was pretty much a compliance topic, right? Like fair labor conditions, elimination of hazardous chemicals. From that, sustainability has advanced to being a part of our DNA, as you've seen on the strategy slide. And we'll drive sustainability hard over the next couple of years and decades, continuing the journey that we have been on, going all the way up to 2050 and beyond, where we aim for carbon neutrality. But also, if you look at what that implies, is that the industry, looking at the sporting goods industry, the fashion industry, is in a big shift, where traditionally operations were set up with a linear outbound perspective, from raw materials to fabric to final product to distribution center to store to consumer, and then it left, out there and was out there in the void. If we take circular economy principles into account, we are increasingly challenged as an industry to also look at inbound capabilities, logistics capabilities, recycling capabilities, but also capabilities to identify all those millions of products that are out there in the marketplace. So when we look at Adidas products specifically, and how we set up sort of sustainability, and appreciate the poll and your interest in materials and product origin and how product is created, we look at that through three different lenses. One lens being what we call the recycled loop, where we aim to eliminate virgin non-renewable feedstock, aiming for products being done with recycled materials. The second one, working with renewable natural materials, what we call the regenerative loop, where we look at the natural fibers, at biosynthetics, to ensure that what we do is regenerative, truly, and made with nature. And then thirdly, we take those material inputs and we start to design for purpose. And purpose could be products that are made to be remade in a circular economy. So circular products where material and their value is being maintained at their highest possible value. Or products that is just durable and made to last. When we talk circular economy, going back to what I just said, whenever we receive those products back, we also need to be able to identify those products and then feed it into respective streams for it to be processed further. So examples across those three loops include obviously Adidas Parley for the Oceans, where last year we have been producing more than 15 million pairs of trainers done with Parley ocean plastic. And that material origin is something that we definitely strive to convey to the consumer and invite the consumer to embark on the journey of where that product comes from. But also there is a moonshot in place in Adidas whereby 2024 we aim to only use recycled polyester and thereby eliminate all our virgin polyester intake into the business globally across our full range. Obviously, also we want to educate the consumer around the material composition of products in the recycled space. But also when it comes to made with nature type products, there are examples of what we explore into, for instance, footwear done with mycelium materials, where we look into the root structure of mushrooms and how to turn cells into material in the end of the day through biofabrication and unlock what natural materials will look like in the future. And as I said, made to be remade, a product concept in Adidas where we design a shoe in this example or apparel against out of one material only. So the shoe that you see on the right-hand side of the slide is done out of one material, from the outsole to the midsole to the upper to the laces. It's all done with one material, no glue included, which makes it 100% recyclable. And once we receive it back, we are able indeed to turn it into new feedstock for new products. That product lens, though, will and needs to get complemented by services, which is specifically relevant in the circular economy space, where we're equally testing and piloting into rental and subscription models. And just a couple of weeks back, we launched a rental pilot in France, or take back in recommerce, where once we get products back, we are able to either recommerce them or to recycle them, whatever the best use of that product is. In order to enable all of that, the material composition and conveying that to consumers, or those services, being able to recognize products once they are back, or just being able to empower consumers to return products easily without any friction, without having the consumers to go somewhere and to return it, or being able to provide access to recommerce. Connected product is becoming more and more center to what we do in the circular economy space. And the reasons are manifold and include obviously the educational aspect, which you also voted for in the poll of, you want to know the product composition, you want to know where that product comes from, you want to know what that product is made out of. But it also unlocks services, as I've just said. So whenever you're done with a product, how can you actually return it? What can you do once you're at that point in time where you look at a product and you're like, well, it's broken, I can't wear it anymore, or I simply don't want to wear it anymore. I have so much stuff. What can I do? Where can I go? So unlocking services like Take Back very easily is very critical and can be empowered through connected product. But also once product is coming back, being able to connect that information back into the supply chain. So whoever the sorter is, whoever the recycler is, whoever the recipient is on the supply chain level, also wants to know what product is coming back and what the material composition is, and then being able to treat it against its best next use. And of course, it's also very critical simply to comply with upcoming regulation. As we look ahead, a couple of years out, there's regulation in discussion like a digital product pass, like means to ensure that there are certain communication standards being upheld so the consumer can very easily understand what sustainable claims mean. So extended producer responsibility, all of those concepts will just lead more and more into the necessity to have connected products. And when I look back at the sustainability journey and I look back at where we were 20 years ago, where probably, fair labor conditions or, looking into chemicals has been perceived as very innovative by the time. And from a standpoint, now it's a hygiene factor. I'm as equally convinced that looking a couple of years out, connected product will become a hygiene factor. But that's the Adidas point of view, obviously. And Max has a number of other examples that will help to unlock the need for circular and connected product even more. So handing back over to Max.
Thanks, David. And thanks for sharing about the amazing initiatives underway at Adidas and how central it is to your 2025 plans. And if you look at the apparel and fashion industry as a whole, it contributes about 10% of all of the carbon emissions globally. So let's not just stop there. Let's now look at how we can give every product in your daily life the opportunity to tell a story and the opportunity for it to become that enabler towards a more sustainable world. If we think about the food that we buy and eat, there's obviously a lot of opportunity to eliminate waste because almost 30% of all food produced globally is wasted. At each step of the supply chain, there's opportunities by knowing more about the product, where it's been, what's happened to it, that we can try to reduce food waste, whether it's at the source, in the processing, the distribution, the retail, and even at the home, where actually the most food waste is generated. A lot of that's generated by managing things like the expiry date or recalls. So If someone recalls romaine lettuce, everyone throws away all of the romaine lettuce, even though it might only be constrained to a single lot of lettuce at one farm. By having that digital identity and being able to connect the consumer directly to the product to learn from those interactions, there's now an opportunity for consumers to act more intelligently in terms of how they handle their food, how they can be empowered to eliminate food waste, and how brands and the entire food supply chain can actually reduce the cost of delivering food from farm all the way to fork. And let's go beyond that to a very topical one in today's world, which is the pharmaceutical industry. And if our medicines and our vaccines could talk, what could they tell us? By connecting a digital identity to an individual product and connecting it to different types of digital triggers and sensors, whether it's individual Bluetooth tags, NFC tags, or QR codes, you can now track a lot of information from the production of that individual vial all the way through to its use. And with over 3.3 billion doses of COVID-19 vaccines administered, even a small fraction of waste adds up. For example, in India, over 20 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines got wasted for various reasons. But if you could have more accurate real-time temperature monitoring, understanding the expiration date and the connection to its track and trace history, you can operate a much more efficient supply chain in a mission-critical environment like pharmaceutical and like drug delivery. And these are just a couple different examples. Each of these contribute to really what is the ambition for so many places, whether it's public or private institutions. And together, by unlocking every industry's opportunity to transform products into connected products and into those enablers, we can truly address global challenges. Throughout the world, dozens of countries have announced net zero pledges, thousands of municipalities and cities. Both Adidas and Avery Dennison have an ambition of net zero and carbon neutrality in 2050. And there's so many other global organizations that are trying to achieve those same results. Now, it's time to also look at action. And as David mentioned, being able to not only be a force for good, but also be in a place of compliance becomes even more critical. According to the United Nations, in the 2 years prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, 79 countries and the European Union reported at least one policy towards more sustainable consumption and production. And the pace of that change and the pace of that regulation is only going to increase. The only way to truly be able to comply is to be able to map your entire end-to-end value chain and be able to connect the individual information about each product in that value chain to the data about what's happened to that product along the way. The different, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions, as well as being able to understand how that adds up towards achieving targets and sustainability goals that are put out to the public that consumers are going to demand more and more accountability for. And this is an incredibly important opportunity to not only measure things and then to manage them, but to be able to, by having this actual data all in one place, be able to drive towards action. And small incremental actions can actually have a tremendous impact. If we look at the beauty industry, if we're able to use and unlock that efficiency by having individually connected products and all of that end-to-end traceability data so that we can reduce the manufacturing excess to just 5%, you can actually, for just one color of a popular lipstick, you actually will be able to reduce the same amount of water that gets consumed by over 13,600 families in the United States each year. That's just for one shade of one popular lipstick brand. So it's a tremendous amount of impact by being able to be more efficient, more accurate, and you get more accurate by getting more granular, going from the individual product and SKU down to the individual item itself, and understanding, because not just each product has a story to tell, but each item has a story to tell. And by being able to understand that story and understand every step of that journey, you can now not only measure what's going on in your value chain, not only manage what's going on, but then actually act towards achieving those net zero pledges. And the way to capture that is by having truly an end-to-end capability through what we call a connected product cloud. A connected product cloud is a way that you can store and manage those measurements of all of the individual interactions with a product throughout its journey and be able to calculate exactly the impact that a product may have throughout its journey, from raw material through production, through the supply chain, through the purchase, and even through its use at the home, and then all the way back around again. And being able to calculate those impacts will truly unlock the potential for products to become that enabler for a more sustainable world. And Avery Dennison has done this by building a platform called atma.io. I talked earlier about peering into the soul of a product. And the soul of a product in Sanskrit is its atma. And what we're doing with a connected product cloud at Avery Dennison is enabling that unique digital identity to actually come to life. And for that digital identity to now be the source of truth for all of the events that happen in the supply chain, to connect to all the different ways that you can connect the product, whether it's with a QR code, a sensor, an RFID tag, or an NFC tag, because each of those serve a purpose throughout all the different use cases you see in the supply chain. And when you actually take that individual unique digital identity and begin interacting with it and storing all those events, you can actually then see the end-to-end truth of what's happened to that product and truly look at its soul. And if you take a look at the resource tab that you have on your screen, there should be a link there that will take you to demo.atma.io. And if you take a moment to go there, and if you recall that QR code that you scanned a few minutes ago, you'll actually be able to see every one of those individual events for that individual item. And now imagine if you do that for every single event that's happened to that product throughout its journey, and for every one of those individual items throughout your value chain. You've now captured the ability to understand exactly what's happening to a product in real time, what it's doing throughout its supply chain, where it came from, how it's made, and now be empowered as a brand to act towards your more sustainable future that your consumers are demanding and that you've pledged. And so we're really pleased with atma.io to be able to create that link from the individual item data to be able to drive towards action towards a more sustainable future through connected products. And I'll hand it back over to you, Joel.
Yeah, great. Well, that was a great presentation, Max and David. And we're going to spend the rest of the this hour taking on some of the questions. We've got a lot of great ones, and keep them coming. We're going to get to as many as we can. By the way, I love that you've used Sanskrit for your brand name. I think there's a cool factor there. So, and I love that you're talking about the soul of products, and I'm sure David at Adidas has some great thought about product souls. But let's just to start, wondering how this moment, how the pandemic coming out of that, how has that accelerated the need for supply chain visibility? Obviously, resilience has become part of that. But talk a little bit about how this technology may be a little bit different now than it was even a year and a half ago. Max, let's start with you.
Okay, that's a great question, Joel. I think there's a few different sort of trends that you see in a COVID, pandemic world or post-COVID world. So a couple examples are the supply chain gets dislocated, very rapidly because suddenly, areas are getting locked down, stores can't be opened, and things shift immediately towards an omni-channel or e-commerce type environment. And at that point, the ability to fulfill orders becomes critical to a brand's ability to meet the demands of consumers. And you need to have that inventory accuracy and that item level visibility to truly be able to drive towards a future where it is going to be predominantly e-commerce and also direct to consumer. And then you see individual use cases that are kind of unique too. For example, when stores were starting to open up, but it was still an uncertain environment, you wouldn't want to go in unless you knew exactly that your product was there. And so atma.io could actually help enable use cases like buy online, pick up in store, where the inventory data coming from RFID can then be fed through atma.io to sources like Google, where you can actually get alerts about, where the inventory is for the product that you want relative to where your location is. And that way, you're not going to have a trip into the store that could be a safety risk or a health risk for you without knowing that there's a 100% chance of your product's there or 99% chance. And then if you look, I think towards just other trends, particularly as it relates to circularity, we've seen probably one of the greatest year-over-year growth spurts of recommerce and resale as a result of the pandemic. I think a lot of people were realizing that they had a lot of excess clothing around their house. None of us needed to wear pants anymore. So there's a unique opportunity really to be able to use recommerce and resale platforms globally to be able to participate and accelerate the circular economy. And to do that, as David mentioned before, you need to know the individual identity of that item so that you know how to care for it, to refurbish it, to know its authenticity, to know where it's been, and to know where it is. And you can't do it at that SKU level. You really have to get to that item level visibility.
Yeah. Right. We may not need to wear pants, but we do need to wear shoes. David, how is this, the need for this shaping up or changed at all at Adidas over the past year?
Well, I would say there are two things. First is that the pandemic indeed caused a boost in digital savviness across consumers. Right, when you're forced almost into digital tools to interact with other people, when the only access to purchasing product is online, then I think the focus and the expectations of consumers to what that experience is to provide has definitely shifted to the next level. I also would say that that the focus on sustainability has, and the demand for sustainability has definitely also increased over the pandemic, where consumers, from what we see, have become more aware that we need to live in sync with this planet and cannot continue our current consumption patterns, which is also why, of course, there has been a huge booster in products being returned to charity bins, etc. I mean, in Germany, there are even cities that had to take out the charity bins because so many items were being donated, and the whole industry is also in a big shift at the moment. And that definitely has been accelerated through the pandemic, and the resulting need out of that, for connectivity, for intelligence on a product beyond the point of sale, has definitely risen as well as a consequence.
Yeah. Max, when you were putting out the poll a little bit earlier, somebody asked about what about some of the other attributes around title or ownership or value. Maybe talk a little bit about what other kinds of attributes can be embedded in the sensors and therefore the intelligence that you can get from them.
Yeah, that's a great question. And so for that, you obviously need to make that link between physical and digital worlds. I'll try to go as far as I can in my answer without using the term NFT. But what you can actually see with things like NFC is you have a unique identity of that NFC tag that you can actually encrypt, and that you can make it so that you use it as a means of authentication, so that it's an authentic, let's say, soccer or football jersey, or it's an authentic COVID-19 test kit, so that when you tap the phone, you can create a connection between that digital identity and that digital trigger with, knowledge of where it's been and as well as ownership. And I think the example of new business models that David was mentioning, another one that's out there as well is peer-to-peer commerce. So being able to actually use a product to drive a channel. So I could actually not just resell my Ultra Boost back to David, to the brand, but actually to David. And to do that, I need to be able to find a way to transfer ownership, and that comes in with a handshake between the physical product and the digital trigger on it, and then its digital identity that can then be managed in the cloud.
Mm-hmm. David, someone asked, how does Adidas balance trade-offs during the material selection process within your 3 loops? So, for example, you come upon a regenerative material that may not be recyclable, or using recycled plastics versus a regenerative material. Talk a little about how that works.
Yeah, it's a great question, and indeed it cuts to the core of day-to-day decision making, indeed, and setting priorities. So I think it's important to first of all, when it comes to innovation, right, you always got to test different avenues. And innovation, from the point that it's launched to the point it eventually becomes commercial and it evolves, there are years oftentimes in between. So I personally believe, you can't let the perfect become the enemy of the good, and you got to find a starting point that eliminates some aspects like carbon or water, energy savings, non-renewable feedstock. I think those are elements that you can work against, and when it comes to what you work for, like trade-offs between carbon to biodiversity, to water to energy. I think then it becomes quite a complex decision matrix that, in all honesty, we're on a journey to understand properly. And sometimes in innovation we need to go routes, and we are going routes where we are not at a perfect endpoint. We are not at the perfect natural 100% biodegradable product yet, but we know it could be a promising avenue to try to test things. And with every innovation test, with every material choice, our internal learning curve just grows, and we'll be able to make smarter decisions next time. Yeah. But it's a great question indeed, because as I said, it's those trade-offs that you need to do every day.
That's what sustainability is all about, is figuring out how to thread those needles, make those trade-offs, and pick the best options at any given moment. Max, there's a number of questions that basically relate to the fact that for all the benefits these technologies bring, there's often unintended consequences or potential for that. So I have a few questions, or a couple questions around that. For example, how do you address, are there any consumer privacy concerns that should be considered here?
Yeah, no, it's actually a really important topic to make sure that, if this platform is all about trust, and connected products are all about creating trust in the brand, that you're actually walking the walk there as well. And so we've ensured with the atma.io platform that what we actually are able to know is really the identity of the items themselves, not the people interacting with them. And so we can understand things based on global standards like EPCIS, the what and the where and the when a product is interacted with in that particular event or business step. But we don't go to the extent to know that it was Joel who was interacting with that item. And that's, I think, an important consideration to ensure across GDPR and other local requirements from privacy that we manage that accordingly. So for us, it's very important that as a back-end platform and as a cloud, we're not seeing that information around who the individuals that's interacting with it. Now, there's obviously opportunities to opt in, right? You can opt into with a brand by downloading their app, joining their club, and signing up. That you can agree to obviously sharing some of your information with the brand. Then that information doesn't itself make its way to a third party like atma.io that's powering the connected product components that are part of that mobile experience.
So you're not able to track my Adidas shoes to know where I am at any given point, or where I've been, or anything of that sort?
I would not be able to know that they were your shoes as atma.io.
Okay. And another question in that realm is, someone comments, I worry that all those sensors just become invisible e-waste. And I'll append to that, what are the issues in terms of the changing the recyclability or dematerialization or any other end of life, next life kind of solution? How does the sensors affect that?
Yeah, it's a really important question, and I think in where we are today in the current state, I think a good analogy is thinking of things like a lithium-ion battery for an electric vehicle. And when you think of it in that sense, there is a material component add, but then a life cycle benefit that far outstrips that. Another example would be if you look at atma.io as a connected product cloud. Obviously, we're operating and managing data in data centers that are kind of hosting the system. But what it's ultimately enabling is a far greater carbon impact than what it itself creates in terms. So on a net basis, you're actually advancing the ball forward from a sustainability perspective. And obviously, as Avery Dennison is the leader in developing intelligent labels, one of our sustainability goals for 2030 is actually driving towards the ability to reduce the impact of our products. And so that's an area where we actually invest heavily towards engineering the future state of intelligent labels like NFC and UHF RFID to where they can be more, the inputs going into it can be more compatible with recycling schemes, and that they can also enable recycling schemes so that you can go up to a bin and tap an NFC tag and then recycle it, and then the brand can know that it was recycled in what location and things like that.
A whole lot of acronyms flying by. I think I can hear the mad Googling going on as we speak. David, a number of people sort of interested in the mechanics of doing this, particularly the how do you get started? How do you initiate a process like this internally? And what have you learned along the way as being, I presume, a pioneer of testing these technologies?
Well, I think it's indeed to what you said. It's finding the right starting point. So the vision is the vision, and of course you got to have one. So you need to know where you're headed roughly. But again, I think you got to be flexible in the way that the vision forms as you learn and as you go. So for Adidas, it's finding the right use cases, finding the right products that we can start to just test this with and put it in front of a consumer and learn, similar to the poll that we did, right? So we also want to poll our consumers by showing them what the experience around product, and then we iterate from there. So again, I think it's an iterative process, and it's important to find the right starting point. And I firmly believe it's finding the right starting point is not so difficult. You just gotta have the courage, let's say, to start. It might not be perfect, but that's what you started for. And then obviously, looking at all the back end stuff, and that's where we are privileged to have the partnership with Avery Dennison for a while, where, you got to look at what can you show, what data, what is relevant for the consumer, how do you show it, how do you engage the consumer onto the journey, and, what are those relevant use cases then from a material composition perspective, care, repair, or take back, end of wear. Et cetera, et cetera. But then, of course, also in parallel, next to the consumer lens, we're engaging with industry bodies, with supply chain partners to see, what information is needed there, for sorting, for recycling, what granularity of information. And I think, if you set up those guardrails and those frames, it's just important to get started. And once you get started, questions and needs will appear. So don't try to think of everything that you got to solve for from the very get-go, because you will surely miss half of it. And, when we started our journey on the circular product, we well, cool, we can do a product out of one material. So yes, let's get that going. But once we had it out, we're like, oh, but how do we actually identify product once it comes back? Or how do we set up the right recycling networks, et cetera? So one step will lead to the next, for sure. Yeah. It's just important to get going.
In Max's presentation, he talked about education as being a core critical need here. I'm wondering, David, if you could talk a little bit about where you see the education needs biggest at the early stage of implementing something like this. Is it internal within the company? Is it external in the supply chain? Probably not external to the customer yet, but what are some of the early education needs, and what have you learned in terms of how do you overcome some of those challenges efficiently?
Well, I think from an internal perspective, parts of education needs just requires internally to learn how to create product against a given purpose, like circularity being one of them. And also designing it in a way that in the end, the information from a material composition perspective or recyclability perspective is visible and easy to access to the consumer, but also to supply chain partners in a reverse supply chain eventually. I would say with supply chain partners or industry partners, it's just important to unlock the level of data that will need to be provided, right? So if you look at a care label of any given product, which consumers usually wouldn't read because it's out of legal requirements and it's like super tiny print and you need like magnifying glasses to understand what it says and find your language first, and from like 30 languages being printed on it. It's like making that information more digestible. And also when it says recycle polyester, for instance, but what does it mean, right? Is it a good thing? Or how is it a good thing, right? And how does it impact sort of the grander story of that product? I think those, I don't want to call it education because it sounds like, you got to learn something. I think there also is the learning element surely is there, but I also think from a brand perspective, we just owe it to the consumer to present and provide that information in a way and form that it actually is meaningful.
Yeah. Well, Max talked a lot about the stories that products tell, and that brings up a question, Max, about how Atma works in a resale situation as it relates to proof of ownership. How do you know that the thing that I'm trying to return is something I actually bought and didn't steal?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And this is where it's not just about connecting the product directly to the consumer, but also connecting all the different sources of product information into the cloud. And so it's not just the scan of the mobile device. It's actually once something gets through the point of sale system and that data gets fed into atma.io, you're then able to register that something was sold in a retail environment. And so you can basically essentially create a logic or a rule where if you scan an item as maybe an inspector or the brand, and you see that it was never actually gone through the retail selling step, which would come from a POS terminal, you actually now have identified that something made a hop somewhere that it probably shouldn't have. And so one of the key things by having a cloud platform is that you're not just capturing all of the data about the item, but you actually need to have the interoperability to connect into all the other business systems throughout the supply chain that have data about that product. You have your ERP systems that manage all the product master data and the SKU information about the product's attributes. You've got the point of sale system that's managing the returns as well as the sale of the item. And then you've got a lot of systems that manage the orders and the distribution and the logistics that all can help be sort of individual sources of data. And so it would have to involve not just, kind of getting the sneaker kind of out of the store in the back door, but also being able to then trick the point of sale and the ERP and in order to actually create a false, record. And so we're actually able to use the fact that there's missing events in the product story that we know that story is a lie. And in turn, we can then use that to help ensure that consumers are buying authentic products, authentic medication, authentic food, and then also purchasing genuine goods from retailers.
Yeah, we keep talking about apparel and footwear for obvious reason. We have Adidas here, but talk about some of the other sectors where you see the biggest opportunities in the short term to implement these kinds of technologies.
Yep. Yeah. So I'll use the two examples. I'll build up those first a little bit more. So the food example is, I think, an important one where I gave the reference to the story where they announced that there's a recall of romaine lettuce, and that's usually where people stop reading and then they immediately go to throw away any leafy greens they have in their refrigerator. That's a tremendous opportunity to reduce food waste. But even before there's an actual recall event happening, if you're able to connect the information about the products that you've purchased to the data about it, such as when it expires, you can actually be given things like an alert that, the cheese in your fridge is going to expire in 5 days. Here's 3 recipes for quesadillas, and so you can actually use content connected to item information to be able to help empower consumers to be more conscious of food waste and throwing food out prematurely, or letting it spoil accidentally. There's also ways you can interact with the consumer during the purchase environment so that they can make more sustainable choices or more nutritious choices by being able to interact with things like QR codes on the products in the store or at the shelf edge to know more about the product before they buy it, so they can know potentially that it was actually organic certified, or what goes with it well for a weeknight meal you can cook in 30 minutes. All of those different content experiences are truly configurable. And then when you look into some more industrial type applications, or you look in things like pharmaceutical, where you need to manage things like the temperature, that's where sensor data comes into play. And so what you need to have is item level sensors, or else if you're using just the sensor for the truck and the truck sensor goes out of whack, then you're throwing the entire truck away versus potentially triaging to just the one case or the one individual item that actually went out of temperature, or whatever that condition could be, humidity, et cetera. So it becomes a unique opportunity to really reduce the waste that happens from remediating a problem, whatever it may be, because you're getting down to that item level. So you're more granular, and you're able to then operate in a much more efficient level in terms of waste and things like that.
How about e-waste in particular? I imagine there's a significant it could be a significant opportunity to track all of this stuff to make sure that it's responsibly handled.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a couple parts of it. There's the input and the output there, right? So you've got the ability to then know what are the components of it when it gets returned, so it can be recycled properly, or you can maximize the amount of recyclability from it. And then you've also got the input, so that you can know that the individual components of those electronic devices actually came from places that were not subject to forced labor or responsibly sourced kinds of things, so that you can also reduce some of the negative inputs that might be coming into the electronic stream as well. And I think both of them are critically important and do require getting down to as small a level of detail as possible, which ideally is at that item level. And you can use lots of different technologies on the physical side to connect to those. And then it's all about having that data in one place that then you can go back to reference when you need to throughout the supply chain and at end of life as well.
One more question about the technology is how small of a company can use it? How small of a supply chain, or however you want to measure it, customers, revenue, any other metric? Or in other words, how big do you have to be to use this?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we've actually built the model to be very modular and really to enable the ability to really scale up your sort of value use of the platform. And so there isn't this need for having a certain threshold to get the value out of it. So I think that on a relative basis, if someone operates with 10,000 items, let's say at that level, and there's an impact that can help them reduce 5% waste, it's still a reduction of 5% waste. And the way we've built our platform is that it scales with the more that you use it, the more value it can create for you, and then the more value that we would capture. So we try to make it as easy to onboard to the platform as possible at any size, easy to configure experiences. If you don't have the large infrastructure and digital teams, there's brands and retailers and companies we work with at the far end of the do-it-for-me spectrum, and then all the way to the other end of the do-it-yourself spectrum. And where we're serving as that cloud to manage those identities, but then they're taking it from there to build all the experiences and all the content on top of it. So we really want to try to be able to serve towards that vision where every physical item has unique digital identity, which means we're servicing both smaller enterprises as well as the largest producers of products in the world.
David, so I'm going to talk a little bit about how you expand the opportunities for your customers to return products. If you don't happen to live in New York City or Tokyo or Berlin or any of major hubs where you're more likely to get the critical mass and have the retail stores, how do you start to democratize that returning and reuse and resale and closing that loop?
Yeah, it's a great question, and indeed we have been on a test and learn journey for a couple of years now, where we've been testing different propositions like return items in store, or enabling consumers to return items following a online order, for instance, with a free return voucher. And those learnings really taught us that in order to unlock take back, it needs to be incredibly easy and convenient for consumers to do so. So it's, it's that dichotomy of, on the one hand side, mentally it's like, yeah, I know I should be returning it. I know I shouldn't be throwing it away. I know. But unless there's an outlet to go to or to access, very, very convenient, no matter where you are, at your fingertips almost, and I know what to do, then you won't do it. So I think just if you follow a consumer journey, just the mental involvement it requires to return product at a physical outlet requires you to be at home. I've certain items I want to return to charity, for instance, or to an Adidas store. Then you're like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna go downtown. Oh yeah, there's an Adidas store, or yes, there is a return outlet. I'm carrying all that stuff then to that return outlet, and it's just too complex. So yeah. I think making it very easy, no matter where you are, is essential. Of course, in making it easy, it comes back to the topic of the session, which is connected product. So ideally, you have the product in your hands, and you're like, okay, I want to return that one. I don't need it anymore, and then you know exactly what to do and how to request sort of a take back voucher, for instance.
Yeah. We've just got a few minutes left, really just 2-3 minutes left. So I want to ask you, David, one quick question and then one final question for you both. David, what's the role of regulation here, both the current ones and the anticipated ones? Are they going to be barriers, or are they going to be enablers to accelerate what you're doing specifically and circularity in general?
Well,
and I know that's going to be, Europe is going to be different than the US, but pick a place and talk about it.
Of course, I mean, definitely going to be accelerators, right? So concepts like extended producer responsibility, which is established in France, for instance, for a couple of years, is being discussed on an EU-wide level. Also greenwashing regulations that will require brands to substantiate their claims in much more detail than what it is today, where it feels like the sustainability fields still allows to say this is carbon neutral, this has footprint reduction, and as an average consumer you're like, what? I don't know what it means. It sounds good, but I don't know what it means. There definitely is regulation being discussed as well. Also digital concepts like a digital product passport, DPP, which is being discussed as well on the EU side. Obviously, you have China, for instance, with very strict regulations that require incredible depth of traceability and being able to substantiate your claims and to educate the consumers that will further accelerate those developments.
Yeah. Great. One final question for you both. This has been a great conversation. And I'm going to start with you, David, and give you, Max, the last word on this. Technology has a tendency to continually evolve and change and hopefully improve along the way. And I'm wondering how is this technology going to be different in 1 or 2 years from now? And how does that factor into your decisions on how to use it, or maybe someone else's decision on whether and when to jump in? David, I'll let you go first.
Sure. I mean, I would say it's never too early to jump in. So, jump in and learn. I think the vision remains, technology either is an enabler, Max mentioned QR codes, NFCs, NFC codes. Those are vehicles to carry certain information to the consumer, and that certainly will evolve as we move forward. What remains, though, is the need to carry that information to the consumer, to supply chain partners, etc. So I would say it's never too late, and then obviously you got to make conscious choices. And technology is awesome, but you always got to balance it with, does it make sense for the consumer? Is it easy, and does it really bring advantages that I need in my related context? So, just because you can, it doesn't mean you should.
Of course. Max, quick answer, because we're almost out of time, but what do you think?
Sure thing. So I think there's two parts to it as from the technology provider side here. The first is, Avery Dennis and Atma, we always take this mantra of disrupt ourselves. So we're constantly thinking of how we can be, proactive versus reactive in terms of adopting new technology. And the second is then building a platform that's designed to be ecosystem driven. And so by having the ability to be open to create almost like an app store environment for connected products, you're basically ensuring that you can now be connecting into the latest and greatest technology that's powering each of those use cases. There's so many use cases that if we do this again, July 8, 2022, as I said at the beginning of the call, there will be so many more new ways of connecting to products, interacting with them. And by having an architecture that's meant to be open and enabling partners to build on top of, you then ensure that you're there now and throughout the future of connected products. We are really just getting started.
We are just getting started, but we are just now running out of time. So let's end it with that. Thanks to Max Winograd and David Quast for lively conversation. And thanks to our webcast sponsor, Avery Dennison, for making this all possible. And to my trusty colleague behind the scenes, Taylor Flores, for making everything run so smoothly. If you want to watch this or rewatch this webcast, the recording will be archived on greenbiz.com, and our team will email you the link once it's available later on today. You should also check out the resources that we're offering by click on the resources button on your window. This includes the webcast slides and you can see right there what it's about, our circularity newsletter, and a link to Verge 21, where we'll be talking about a lot of these technologies. And if you want to watch more GreenBiz webcasts, just go to greenbiz.com/webcast, and you'll see more events just like this one. On behalf of my colleagues at GreenBiz, thanks so much for tuning into today's webcast. I'm Joel McCower. Until next time, have a great day.